Hello, space friends. Captain Snuggles here, back with some more Space Haven content. This one's going to be a little bit different. So I am coming into sort of the climax of Snug Haven, as I've been preparing to attack the slaver home base and free as many slaves as I possibly can. That's going to be one hell of a fight. But in my last video, and a couple others as well, I've gotten some comments about my build, and one comment in particular pointed out that newcomers to the game probably don't have any idea what any of this stuff is in this crazy hodgepodge of a ship. Which is an excellent point. This is a very complicated shipbuilding simulator, if you want to call it that. And yeah, there's a lot going on. And so I thought it might be appropriate to take a little bit of time before we get to the climax to make sure everybody knows, well, what's what on our beloved space triangle here. So, I would love for this just to be a little intro segment to the Slaver Homeworlds episode, but let's be real. There's a lot going on here, and I fully expect to get enough content for a whole little mini episode just out of this. So, well, we'll see how it goes. But let's dive into it. So I have loaded up, conveniently enough, my oldest save, which just happened to be right before my attack on the strange Yoda spiral. So that's super convenient, perfectly timed. And so this is the condition of the ship right before the climactic battle. So let's dive into it. And veterans of the game, I am curious to hear your thoughts. Now, bear in mind, I have pretty much finished recording all of the content for this series, more or less. And so, feel free to give me tips, but don't be surprised if they don't get implemented in the series, because that's just the nature of content creation. But I am very interested to hear people's thoughts on what I've done here. As a first timer, I'm pretty proud of the Tetris I've done with this ship, cramming a lot of utility into a reasonably small package. But let me know what you think. And now then, I've struggled to think of where to start here, but how about we start with the basics, which is the ship footprint. So, this whole rectangle here is the area that I have available to build in, whereas, of course, this is the actual footprint of the ship that I've chosen to build. Now, there are certainly some pros and cons to taking up less space than you have available. The big pro is that the more compact your ship is, the more efficient your defensive modules are. And so shields weaken as they get stretched over a larger and larger area. Same with your hull stabilizers, sort of your armor modules. And so I've made a trade-off. I've made the choice to have less space available for crew and for a variety of equipment, trading that space off for just better defense. I'm pretty happy with it. I think I've got everything I need on the ship crammed in just barely. Just barely. Now then, in terms of what the ship actually contains, I feel like we can start from the outside view here, looking at the exterior of the hull. Just talking through what you can actually see on the outside here. This is generally, you can sort of see from the outside of the ship everything that can interact with other ships and with the environment, more or less. So that's a good place to start. So you can see your offense, defense, and some of the utility modules. Utility-wise, the solar panels are pretty obvious. They provide a little bit of power. These 8 panels that I have here are enough to run my ship when I'm not in combat. Now, when all the combat modules are powered up, well, I need more power generation than just these 8 panels, but we'll We'll get to my serious business reactor room here in a bit. As far as other utility goes, you can see the hyperdrives here, and I'll talk about why I have as many as I do here shortly. You can also see, faintly, cargo storage. It's these orange and gray boxes here. I don't know why that's displayed on the exterior, but it is, so there you have it. You can sort of see how that's laid out. And you can see the shuttle bays, these faint yellow rectangles, and the pod bays that launch a variety of craft with the yellow squares. Moving on to the defensive modules, we have our big shield generators here. These big guys. Pretty Star Wars-y, sort of Empire Strikes Back feel. Pretty easily identifiable. Much less identifiable are the hull stabilizers, the armor modules. These are mostly on the interior, but they are displayed very faintly on the exterior with this red and gray pattern. Oh yeah, you can also see some power as well, with power nodes. Once again, I'm not totally sure why these blue boxes, these power nodes and accessories are displayed on the exterior, but they are. And then, of course, well, actually, I guess the point defense turrets here technically do count as defensive modules in a way. So these Gatling gun-looking guys are point defense turrets, and they shoot down incoming craft, incoming asteroids. That's about it. But pretty much anything that can be shot down, they will shoot down. They do have to be manned on the bridge. We'll talk about that. And then the big guns. The smallest of the big guns are the auto cannons here. Auto turrets, I believe they're actually called. Yep, auto turrets. I always call them auto cannons, but, well, what can you do? Old habits die hard. The auto turrets are weak turrets that are good for just sort of chipping away at enemy ships. They're equally effective, or equally ineffective, I should say, against shields and hull. But they don't cost any ammunition, and they don't take that much power to fire. And so they're pretty nice when a fight is more or less already won. You just need to be efficient about dealing the final blows. I do eventually make some changes here, and spoiler alert, will eventually replace these in a later episode. But, going into the Slaver homeworlds, these are what I'm rocking. I also have 2 laser cannons, which are great for dealing damage to shields, and they're also pretty good at damaging modules. Not as good at actually damaging the hull, the armor of enemy ships. They're good for stripping shields, and stripping off the external components of the ships. Of course, you can see that each of these external components has a health bar. That's how many hits it can take. And each hit from each various weapon type does have a certain percentage chance to deal damage to an external component if it hits. So lasers have a pretty good chance to do that. But what has a great chance to do that is the rocket turret. I have 4 of these because I absolutely love them. They cost very little power to fire. They do take rockets to fire, but rockets are not that expensive. But these are fed by ammunition, as are the laser cannons. The rockets are absolutely excellent for stripping off the enemy ship's surface components, really reducing the amount of damage they can deal and the amount of shield they can get back up. And they're also very good for dealing damage to hull. They can even open up micro breaches in the hull, venting the ship's atmosphere. These things are great. Absolutely love them. Absolutely devastating. Once the shields are stripped down, these things can just go to work. Now, they are very bad at actually dealing damage to shields, and so they really are only effective once the shields are stripped, which is why I have these 2 laser cannons. And in classic Captain Snuggles fashion, I have forgotten the biggest and most obvious thing on the surface of the ship, which is the scanner. This is a utility module that, well, as the name suggests, allows me to scan the interior of an enemy ship in a small radius. to see what's going on inside, which can be really helpful both for boarding operations and for figuring out what to target with my awesome rocket salvos. Right, and hopefully I covered everything. That is the exterior of the ship. That's the breakdown. I, of course, did not cover everything. I also forgot my ore refinery here, and so when I launch mining pods out of these two pod bays, they go out and mine asteroids and bring the ore back here, drop it off, and that then deposits it inside the ship for use by the engineering room. Right, now that, hopefully, is the whole exterior of the ship. Now let's get to the actual complicated part, which is the interior. Now this is going to be one heck of a tour, so please bear with me. Let's start off with the brains of the operation, the bridge. I have it positioned up at the front here because that is the classic sort of sci-fi position. It would be much better for the bridge to be in the center of the ship for easier access, because if you want to do anything in combat, you need people sitting in these chairs on the bridge. And, well, having it off to the side, like way out on the end of the ship like this, is not ideal. But, it's fine. It's sci-fi. It's good for the roleplay. So, well, I tolerate it. The odd man out on the bridge is the research lab and research workbench. These, unsurprisingly, get us through our tech tree here. They have no business being on the bridge, except that they look like they fit. They look very similar to the actual bridge consoles, and I didn't have anywhere else to put them because they're pretty bulky, so here they are. Now, in terms of the actual functional workings of the bridge, there are these 4 consoles which are frustratingly difficult to tell apart. This is the weapons console. If somebody is sitting here, you can fire the guns. This is the navigation console, which is only used for powering up the warp drive. This is the shields console, which is used to recharge the shields. Now, the shields still work if this console isn't manned, but they'll get stripped down pretty quickly. If you want any kind of shield recharge at all, you need somebody sitting at this console. And then the operations console, which is used for the point defense turrets to shoot down incoming asteroids and enemy craft, and for making contact, opening communications with other ships. So if you want to do any of that, you have to have somebody sitting at ops. That's the overview of the bridge, and I'm already realizing that the organizational system I had planned for this is going to be pretty topsy-turvy, so why don't we go over something else first, real quick, just to add to the already existing disorganization. Let's look at, not this stuff down here, but just the basic readout here. That's going to help to sort of orient you and to go over some of the basics of the ship here. So, each ship has, starting from the top left here, what we call core points. Core points are only used for building system cores, and system cores are only used for giving you system points. And so essentially the only purpose of core points is to convert them into system points, which, yeah, I'm not totally sure why that's there, aside from just to maybe add a little bit of realism. But it is what it is. The number of core points that you have is dictated by not the size of your ship, but the size of the canvas here. So the total size of your shipbuilding plot is what determines how many core points you have. And so, again, even if I were only occupying this section, just a very small chunk of this big shipbuilding canvas, I would still have the same 6 core points that I have with the space triangle here. And even if I occupied every single square of my canvas, I would still have the same 6 core points. And again, those core points are used to convert into system points, and system points are what enable us to build the higher tech, more useful modules. You can see a whole list dropping down to the top left here. We have our defensive modules require system points. That's the shield generator and the hull stabilizer. The offensive modules, the rockets and lasers and point defense and all that, also take system points. The hyperdrives take system points. And let's see, shuttles and power nodes and power generators and a couple other odds and ends also take system points. And so system points are what really drive, what really dictate our ability to do any of the really important stuff that the ship does, fighting and flying and powering itself, essentially. So those are really important. You can see I had 72 available. I used all 72 of them. I may not have used them as totally efficiently as I could have, but I think I did all right. I'm pretty happy with my system points allocation. I think I do improve it a little bit by the end of the series, but this is pretty okay. Right, moving on. We have the mass of the ship, which I guess it's tons. I don't know. But the mass of your ship is what determines how many hyperdrives you need. That's essentially the whole point of it. And so my 5 X1 hyperdrives here can propel 8,000 tons, question mark, of mass, out of which I am using about 6,500 tons. And so there's not really a whole lot else to say here. It determines your mass determines the number of hyperdrives you need, and it determines how much fuel is consumed with each jump. And that's really all there is to it. And mass, unsurprisingly, is determined by how much ship there is and how much stuff you have on the ship. I don't know the exact details, but most of it comes from the ship itself. It'll fluctuate between, 6,300 and 6,800, essentially, based on how full my cargo storage is. Moving on, let's see, we have a readout for the number of crew we have, both our actual crew and our refugees and prisoners and even slaves if we were evil enough to have them. And we have a nice little readout of the average mood of the crew, which is pretty convenient. You can see from this that my crew is prone to overeating, with 10 cases of the ate too much condition on the crew, which is... well, it's a good problem to have, I suppose, in this type of game. Speaking of food, we do have a food readout, very convenient, telling us how much food we have left on the ship, and how long it's going to last based on the current rate of consumption. That's going to be dictated by the kitchen as well as by the greenhouse, which we'll talk about later. Similar for oxygen, gives us a nice readout, because gas management is a big important part of the ship construction, and so this doesn't cover all of the gases that we can manage, but it tells us about oxygen as well as about the condition of the gas scrubbers that remove CO2 and smoke and other harmful gases. And then there is the power. Now, this readout is nice, although it does fluctuate dramatically. Power, as you might expect, is what? Well, powers everything on the ship. You run out of power, you're in serious trouble. The ship does have some backup power, but it doesn't last that long, especially not on a ship this size. And so this gives you a little readout of how long the ship can last at the current consumption rate with the fuel that is currently available. That will fluctuate dramatically because the ship actually takes very little power. Sort of when everybody's at ease. Let's take a look. Pause here. Yeah, so we only consume between 40 and 50, what is it, megawatts? We'll call it megawatts per second. Whereas I think, I believe the energy refinery, when it's active, consumes 100 per second by itself. And a lot of these, I think the laser cannons consume 300 per second when they're active. And so there are huge spikes in energy consumption when you're producing a lot of things or when you are in combat. So hopefully that gives you a quick overview of what the basic stats of the ship are that we're going to need to try and manage with all of our internal modules here. So now with that in mind, why don't we dig a little bit deeper into the details. So again, talked about the mass dictates the number of hyperdrives. I had 4 hyperdrives, had to add 1 more, which took us up to that 8,000 mass. And so, we were basically just over the threshold where we could get away with 4 hyperdrives. Could have kept going with that, but chose to not risk potential problems, give us a little bit of a buffer zone to add more stuff onto the ship, and added that 5th hyperdrive on. So now we're sitting pretty. Looking at our power, I have my reactor room here with 3 power generators in it. I only keep 1 on, usually, this biggest X3 power generator. It's the most efficient one, produces the most power per unit of fuel. But like I covered earlier, you get huge power spikes in combat or in periods of high production. And so I also have 2 secondary generators as well, an X1 and an X2. So I have all 3 of the advanced power generators in here. And that's going to just help us to cover those big spikes. I turn these off and on as needed, essentially, while always leaving the X3 running. Now then, moving on along the readout here, you have the various gas management equipment, which is not very exciting, but I'll point it out quickly. Here is an oxygen generator. Here I have a few scattered around the ship. You can see from the readout here we need 2.2, and so we can't build 2.2, so I built 3 instead. We have 1 and 2, and I assume there's a 3rd one somewhere. There it is. So they're scattered around the ship because the distribution of, it's probably easier to see with temperatures, the distribution of gases and temperature and all that is not uniform throughout the ship. It's not even room by room, it's tile by tile. And so if we were to drain all the oxygen from the ship, vent all the oxygen, and sort of restart it, you would see the O2 spreading out from this generator, these tiles, and then these tiles, and then these tiles, etc. Same with this generator, same with this generator. And so it's good to have your gas management and temperature management spread out throughout the ship, which is what I've done. Speaking of gas management, we also have gas scrubbers. Just as we produce oxygen from the O2 generator, we also scrub out CO2 and smoke and hazardous gas with the gas scrubbers. These usually don't get used very much, but if things catch fire, for example, if one of my clumsy crew members, looking at you, Lana, if one of my clumsy crew members has an accident and lights something on fire, these gas scrubbers are really nice for quickly scrubbing out all that smoke. Similarly, well, fires make heat, and so it's nice to have some extra thermal regulators scattered around for fires or other events that create a lot of extra heat. And so you'll see mostly these wall thermal regulators, these wall-mounted units, scattered around the ship. There are also floor-mounted ones here as well. Pretty much this color scheme, this sort of brownish orange, mounted on the wall or here on the floor. those are the thermal regulators. Super important. Temperature management is critical for everything around the ship, and so you'll see all of that, gas management and the temperature management, scattered all around. Now then, also related to gas management is the food production. Now, the greenhouse sort of has its own little biosphere set up. I do have a water collector because plants emit a lot of water vapor. I have a gas scrubber. I thought I had a CO2 generator in here somewhere as well, but maybe at this point I'm just using my crew as CO2 generators. That wouldn't be especially surprising. And so plants, of course, will produce some oxygen, they will produce water vapor, and they take CO2, and so the gas balance for this room needs to be a little bit different. And for that reason, sort of to that end, you can see that this room is connected directly to a lot of bedrooms, as well as to the lounge. Basically, I'm trying to keep as many crew in close proximity to the greenhouse as I possibly can, to provide the plants with the CO2 they need. And then the gas exchange with the rest of the ship is cut off. Each door does have a built-in vent that can be opened and closed. You can see that being graphically demonstrated there. So I have this vent closed, this vent closed, this vent open, probably this vent open as well, so that as many bedrooms as possible are venting all that sweet, sweet CO2 to the greenhouse, which is then providing them with oxygen. So sort of a little microcosm of gas management on the ship. Greenhouse, of course, is what produces our food. As a quick aside, food is consumed, unsurprisingly, by the kitchen, which takes raw ingredients, all of these that we see here, to produce what we call prepared food, which is food that has been prepared in a kitchen. Surprise, surprise. Now, this game is freaking complicated, man. This game is freaking complicated. Look at all this. We have to not only provide the crew with enough food, but provide the proper nutritional balance, which is laid out here. And so, essentially you can modify this recipe percentage by percentage point with each category: fruits and root vegetables, artificial meat, nuts and seeds, even monster meat and human meat if you're so inclined. Each of which has different nutritional content. They're trying to provide your crew with balanced diets. And I think the crew seems pretty happy with this diet. They're certainly healthy, and I think they occasionally get the like ate a fine meal buff like you get in RimWorld. But man, this is complicated. And this readout is pretty nice because it, essentially the kitchen and your crew's health readouts will tell you whether your meal balance is correct, and then this readout will tell you whether your crop balance is correct for consistently providing those meals. But man, it is complex. I hope I did it justice there. But yeah, the inputs here are fertilizer and water. Fertilizer you can, unsurprisingly, you can get from biomass, so you can essentially you can compost it from poop using this composter here, or you can produce it from chemicals. And then, well, water is water. You can get it from ice, or you can get it from these water collectors. Right. So that is those are all the intended functions of the greenhouse. There are a couple of other sort of supplementary crops as well, like fibers for cloth, but that's the overview of the greenhouse. You can also see a couple of other things in here. There's some storage just for easy access between this composter and a supply of biomass for it to compost. And, well, because I have a pretty compact ship setup, I've also crammed in 2 shield generators, just because I couldn't find another spot for them. And so I'm pretty proud of my Tetris here. I think I've gotten a lot of utility out of this room. But I guess the logical segue there would be to point out that, yes, shield generators are visible on the exterior of the ship. They're also visible as well, with the same footprint, the same 3x3 footprint on the interior. Same with everything else that you can see on the outside, it's also present on the inside. So here's some point defense, this 2x2 column looking thing. There's our scanner. Here are the auto turrets. Here are the laser cannons, the energy turrets, and the sweet rocket turrets. You can see I've done some weird Tetris here. The neat freaks among you probably will not be super pleased with this because, in my main hallway of the ship, I do have rocket turrets and toilets and a med bay and a surgery bay and some greenhouse going on as well. So, yeah, I've made some odd design decisions. OSHA probably would not approve of this. But, well, hey, there ain't OSHA in space last time I checked, so this was the best Tetris I could do. Right. I think... Nope, that doesn't quite conclude talking about this basic resource overview, because we also have the crew themselves and the mood. So the crew themselves, both for their health and for their mood, need bedrooms, which you can see here. They don't care at all that they're sleeping in these narrow little cramped spaces. They're totally fine with this as long as they're sealed off, away from sources of extreme noise, and, you know, the right temperature and all that. They're perfectly happy for these cramped little crew quarters, which, you know, I think that's probably accurate for a spaceship anyway. So this is really all the crew needs. It's just these little slots here. We can also build bunk beds, but sleeping in the same room as others makes folks a little bit unhappy, unsurprisingly. And so the bunk beds are mostly for prisoners or refugees, people who either we don't care about as much or who are not going to be on the ship that long. Now then, bathrooms are what you'd expect. They are a room with a toilet in them. And, that's about it. The toilet has a readout for number of dumps. It can store 10 dumps before it produces a unit of biomass and a unit of water, I think, or something like that. Good stuff. Good stuff. Quality content. Then, let's see. There's also a rec room for managing the crew's mood. So, this is not a bad one. It could be better. But hey, these guys have a table to eat at, some benches to sit on, a nice decorative screen, some nice plants, and a jukebox and an arcade machine. You can see them using these, you can hear them using the jukebox, and you can see them playing games on the arcade machine, which is pretty cool. And because of that, our average mood is pretty dang good, 81 out of 100. Nothing to complain about at all, which is important because we're about to go into a serious fight, and, I need my folks as happy and healthy as they can be. I also have an arcade machine for refugees and prisoners, a kitchen for refugees and prisoners, and a bathroom for refugees and prisoners, just because there's a weird locking system where if a refugee or a prisoner has access to something, then that module can only be used by refugees and prisoners. I don't really love that. I think the permission system in RimWorld is probably better, but it's fine. It works out. So, yeah, I have it set up based on that, and the arcade machine just to try to prevent any rebellions or mental breakdowns or anything like that. Last note on the crew is that, we want them happy, which we just covered. We also want them healthy. So I have 2 med bays in here, which, once again, some pretty desperate Tetris went on to cram these in. I've converted this room between about 8 different things. I think it gets converted one more time before all's said and done. But I've managed to get in 4 medical beds, which are used for treating the really serious life-threatening injuries. I also have 2 surgical enhancement talking too fast. I have 2 surgical enhancement facilities, which are used to, well, surgically enhance crew members. That's essentially the bionics system from RimWorld. So let's look at Lana again. Yeah, so Lana, because she is clumsy, has a cerebral cap, which reduces her clumsiness, and she also has an ocular implant because she's a good fighter, and this just increases her accuracy even further. So there are a variety of surgical implants that you can give your crew, and I did my best to really deck the crew out with those implants before going into this climactic battle. Alright, and that, I think, covers the health and happiness of the crew, as well as the gas balance, the food, the power, hyperdrives, systems, and system cores, and all that. So now, we can get into an even bigger readout to go through. Now bear in mind, you all asked for this. You asked for this absolute information dump. So, yeah, here it is. But I'll try to be quick. Let's see. Credits. Credits, thankfully, do not take up storage space. That's just our bank account. And 25,000 is pretty nice. That's probably enough to cover most anything I could ever want. But this balance will get a whole lot bigger before all said and done. Tools are a weird resource. They're, your construction crew has what's called a 3D printer gun, I think. So they don't build modules, they 3D print them. If you have the schematics that you get from research, you can just 3D print any of this stuff. Like you can 3D print this big laser cannon, which is pretty badass, I gotta say. But inexplicably, even though that's the case, the fuel for those guns is still called tools, and so apparently you cram in these screwdrivers and wrenches into the canister of the 3D printer gun, and it spits out 3D printing goop, which turns into laser cannons. It's probably best not to think too much about that, but that's what those are. You do need a tool bench to produce tools. I have a tool bench somewhere tucked out of the way. I do not care to scroll around and find it, so just trust me, it's here. Alright, now then. Hyperium is used to make hyperfuel. Hyperfuel is used to power the hyperdrives. Unsurprising. Energium is used to make energy stuff. Energy stuff is used to power the energy turrets, as well as our power generators. Surprise, surprise. Water is, well, used for everything that water would normally be used for. Plants and... Actually, I don't think your crew drinks water. Do they? I just realized that. That's a revelation. Yeah, so water enters the crew system through plants, I suppose. But other than drinking, water is used for all the normal stuff. You can get it from ice, or you can get it from water collectors. Energy rod, made from energium, is what specifically powers the power generators. We talked about hyperfuel. All of these blocks here, except for super blocks, well no, even super blocks, all of these blocks here are used to build various types of modules around the ship. So everything you see here was made with some kind of a block, and the ship itself was built with whole blocks. Now then, we have our 4 types of food here. We might have some monster meat or human meat on board. No, thankfully we do not. So we have our 4 types of food here, which we went over earlier. IV fluid and medical supplies are consumed by the medical beds to do medical stuff, and they are produced, I believe they're both produced at the chemical refinery here. And so, sort of continuing our tour of the ship, basically these next 2 rows of stuff are all produced in this room here, the manufacturing center. And so I've tried to get as much manufacturing stuff as I can crammed into this one room. There are a couple of other things scattered around, but for the most part, this room is used to make this stuff, and this stuff is used to power all kinds of things and facilitate all kinds of activities around the ship. We have everything from plastics and textiles to rocket ammo to augmentation parts for surgeries. There's a lot going on here. I'm not going to cover every single thing, but yeah, that's what happens in this room. This room takes raw materials and makes all of this stuff. Speaking of raw materials, we have this row of them down here. Ice, metals, carbon, raw chemicals, and biomass. All of these, everything except biomass is gotten from outside the ship. There are ways to get it on the ship as well, for example, from the composter, but most of it is gotten from asteroids. Brought in here, refined at the ore processor, and then used to produce various things. Biomass is mostly produced on the ship, both when farming and when pooping, and that is also used for, mostly it's used for compost, which then produces other materials from that biomass to make stuff in this room. And the last things on the list also produced in this room are weapons and armor. And then there are the monster corpses. You can also store human corpses. Unsurprisingly, those are used to make monster meat and human meat, or used for various experiments for research. Whew, man. That was a lot, and hopefully it was reasonably understandable. But again, this is a freaking complicated game. Let's take a quick look at some of the odds and ends around this room. Let's see, we have these logistics robot stations, which create and power our Roombas. There's a different type of robots as well. Haven't messed with them, but they do exist. Let's see, we have a couple more shield generators. We also have our hull stabilizers here, our armor modules. And we have actually 4 pod bays in this room, which you would think is an odd choice, but I like having 4 pod bays in the room here. We have 2 mining pods and 2 fighters. Now, the reason I like having those pod bays in the room here is because each of those has an airlock attached to it. And now a lot of fires start in this room for various reasons. And the room, because of everything in it, is just naturally hot and smoky. And so having these airlocks within this room just makes it really easy for crew members in the room to respond to fires and other incidents. They can just pop over a couple of blocks, grab a spacesuit, pop back out, extinguish the fire, etc., etc. I think having these in here has really improved the response time of my crew members to the incidents in this room. There's another one over here as well. This is my construction pod. Once again, nice to have spacesuit accessibility scattered around the ship. You know, if anything happens in or near this greenhouse, any kind of fire or other temperature or gas anomaly, plants are probably going to die unless it gets fixed really quickly, and so it's nice to have a spacesuit easily available right there. Since my cursor is over it, I'll also mention the hypersleep tanks. So not on every jump, but when jumping between clusters here along these hyperlanes, the crew does need to go into hypersleep or they get sick. And well, we need these tanks to put them into a hypersleep. The tanks are powered by energy rods, and that's about all there is to it. Let's see. Cargo storage, pretty self-explanatory. It's nice that you can visually see how full it is. We have a couple of fairly empty ones, a couple of fairly full ones. Comes in large and small varieties. This is the interior of the scanner. These are just cover objects. You can build those and then crouch your crew members behind them. I don't know when I pick up on the whole crouching thing. Probably way too late in the playthrough. But eventually I realized that you can crouch behind cover to make yourself much harder to hit. And so that's what all this is there for. This is the airlock. It is completely unsecured, inexplicably, in a game that really goes for realism. The fact that airlocks cannot be locked is really something else. But, well, on the plus side, it means that boarding parties always come from the same spot, or spots, your airlock, or airlocks plural, which means you always know where to defend. And so, essentially, if I see a boarding party coming, you'll see me line up all my crew behind these cover objects, hopefully crouch them, and just murder everybody as they come through the airlock. So I don't really like that system very much, but it is the system we have, and it tends to work in my favor more often than not, so I can't complain too much. And oh yeah, the shuttles. Shuttles are pretty self-explanatory. You've seen me use them about 1 billion times. They're used for moving crews and resources. My god, I hope that's everything. This game is so complicated. It's absolutely nuts. Make sure to shame me in the comments if I missed something. I'm sure I did. But that's pretty much the overview. I hope this gets at what you all were asking for. Whew, man, it's already been 46 minutes. But I did want to do one more thing, which is have you all meet the crew. There have been some crew members that have slipped in with relatively little fanfare, and there are others that you know pretty well, like the infamous Ralph up here. But let's take it from the top, shall we? Why don't I just go in order? Alochi was a recruit, captured her from the pirates, really needed an ace fighter pilot for my new fighters here. So I decided to recruit her instead of turning her over to the authorities or executing her. She is a great fighter pilot, good at a couple other things, but pretty much a fighter pilot. Bert Bob has the best name out of the bunch, is sort of a generalist, not excellent at anything, but can do a lot of things. Gary, one of the original 4, used to be my best fighter, tends to surrender pretty quickly because apparently he's too smart to fight, ? The smart traits and increases his surrender probability. So he's no longer even in the top 5 of fighters, but he's okay at fighting. Really, he's my builder and my industry guy. He spends a lot of time in the manufacturing center here. Hayden was a rescue. I found him in a hypersleep casket on a ship. He is quite a good botanist, and training him up to be a good fighter as well. Justin is excellent on the bridge. He is okay at navigation, good at ops shielding and operations, so he spends a lot of time in here. He's also a good researcher, and so pretty much this is Justin's room right here at the bridge. Quests, I believe, was my first rescue, an absolutely excellent fighter. Not the best shot, but is very tough with 4 zest, very unlikely to surrender with 5 bravery, and has very good weapons. We'll eventually get up to weapons 9, which is great. Lana, also a great fighter. I think one of my second or third rescue, maybe. So these two are sort of the core of the A team. My best fighters. I have 4 really good fighters, and those are 2 of them. Marion, also one of the original 4, my pretty much go-to botanist and also a good researcher, but she kept the crew fed almost on her own for a long time, and so props to Marion for that. Ralph, frickin' Ralph. If you look at his character sheet, he looks absolutely amazing, but he somehow always manages to find a way to slack off. He's also usually the first to surrender with a whopping 1 bravery. So anytime there's a fight, Ralph is usually the first to surrender and is usually the last to show up to work. Unfortunately, I really need Ralph. One of the original 4, is capable at a lot of things, is my absolute best guy on shields, and is my best medic, as well as a good botanist. So, Ralph is a real smart guy, very useful around the ship when he chooses to show up to work. Oh, Ralph. I wish I could flush him out an airlock, but I really, really need him. Sorry to say, but Ralph is an absolutely key crew member. Alright, another one of the original four. Sarah, good fighter, excellent builder, and also my best person on ops, so she tends to man the point defense when there's a fight. Sherry is a pretty new pickup. I believe I rescued her from aliens. I think she was glued to a wall and infested with alien spores, if I recall correctly. Rescued her. She has the Spacefarer trait, which is excellent. So she is that makes her a good fighter, especially on away missions with the spacesuit. She's not really great at anything else, but her fighting skills and her shooting accuracy really make her a good asset. Then Talia and Tyrus. Tyrus, you all remember, is the absolute MVP of one of my earliest serious fights, and so he has earned himself a permanent permanent MVP badge and a permanent spot on the A team because of that. Talia is also excellent. Like Sherry, she has the Spacefarer trait, but she has better stats than Sherry. Excellent shooting accuracy, good bravery, not very good health, but very good weapons. So pretty much Talia, Tyrus, Lana, and Quest are spectacular fighters, and they are my A team for any kind of boarding operation. Frequently, I will assemble a B team as well, since I do have 2 shuttles. I'll send the A team in first, and then cobble together from my remaining decent fighters. You know, Hayden, Gary, Alachi, Sherry, Sarah. Pretty much those 5. I'll cobble together a B team and send them over as backup frequently. But yeah, that's the crew. That's the overview. And that's the ship. Man, oh man, I have trouble imagining that this made any sense to anyone. There's so freaking much to cover here. It's insane. I'm honestly slightly proud of myself for being able to keep all of this straight in my head to the limited extent that I can. So I'm proud of this. Really curious to hear from the novice folks, the people who don't play Space Haven or are fairly new to the game, whether this made sense to them. And I'm curious to hear from the veterans whether this is even a remotely halfway decent layout, a remotely halfway decent crew, a remotely halfway decent way to split things up. Yeah, how am I doing? I'm pretty curious to know. Again, it's too late in recording for me to change much of anything. I think it's going fine for my purposes, but I would love to know for future reference and just to satiate my own curiosity. So, man, oh man. Oh yeah, this could totally be an intro. A 53-minute intro. No, this is going to be a little intermission, a break, stringing you all along before the exciting climax of this space adventure. And so this is the Space Triangle and its intrepid crew that I will be taking in to the Slaver headquarters in the strange Yoda spiral in the next episode. So, I hope that watching me fumble my way through this was at least entertaining for some of you. And what I really hope is that it was useful or interesting to some of you. So, thank you for tuning in. We'll have some serious action in the next one, don't you worry. Until then, this is Captain Snuggles, signing out.